Welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. We are so glad that you're joining us today. I'm in the studio with Dr. Kim, and we are excited to talk about the topic of cultivating a servant-hearted marriage. Does being servant-hearted have a place in your marriage? And how are you doing with being kind and generous toward your spouse and through your marriage? It's really cool because marriage can be a bright light to the world around us, like how Jesus talked about being a city on a hill, but it won't happen by accident. So today we're talking about how to create a more serving marriage, even when it's hard. So, Dr. Kim, to start off, how would you define what it means to be servant-hearted in marriage?
I think for us, we tried to model off what we saw Jesus do, because I think he is our example, and he is the perfect example of sacrificial love, that he died for us. And so I think a lot of being a servant is that process of dying to self and putting your spouse above you. And when you're both doing that, things really go well. And so it talks about Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve. So I think it's for us, it's the daily choices that we make to each other to act in love, even if it's inconvenient, even if we don't want to, even if the other person just ticked us off, and I'm not saying it's easy, but I think that's what being a servant really is to work through those things. And I think when you put Jesus as your example and the way he did serve us, and he died for us, in the way he treated people and how he even treated the people who were persecuting him. And I think you can take that and you apply it to marriage, and it's like, okay, I want to love my spouse no matter what. I want to love them whether it's been a great day or not great day, if they're in a good mood or bad mood, and then serve them in whatever way. It comes back to being a student of your spouse. What does my spouse need from me today? And then with God's help, the best you can doing those things. And when you do them over and over and your spouse does them over and over, it just becomes a lifestyle for you of serving each other. And I think the times when we get there, it's like, it's just, I don't know, got a little bit of heaven almost. I mean, it's like we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. We don't always do it, but we know we've done it enough to know the difference when we do.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And I love what you're describing, that it just becomes a way of life, becomes like a habit. And that's where we all want to be, I think.
Yeah. And I think we talked a lot in the past about how you frame your spouse. Well, I think if you frame your spouse as a gift from God, and take away those other labels that they or you have put on them of being or selfish or prideful or all those kind of things, and just look at them as the gift God gave you in marriage, then I think it's much easier to become a servant to them and keeping your focus on that. That doesn't mean they're still not going to mess up or do something that ticks you off. But in the big picture, this person is a gift. And I made a vow to that person to love them through all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, your vow didn't say, well, as long as things perfect, stay married and whatever. No, it goes to rich report and does all those things.
Yeah.
And I think those words help us know what we need to play out when we're in the marriage relationship.
Yeah, that's true. And if you think about it, you gave the example of Jesus as the servant. I mean, he wasn't serving people who served him back. He was serving people who were just, they were a mess. They really were. Sometimes he'd ask them to do things too, pray with me, stay up and pray with me. They didn't do it. He asked again. They didn't do it. And so if you think about that as your example, that kind of shows you that you're not doing it for some kind of result. You're doing it because that's what we're called to do.
Yeah. If Jesus had looked at them that didn't pray, stay awake and pray twice, and he walked out of that garden going, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that for you. You're not worth it. You don't even pray with me. No, he didn't.
Yeah.
He still went to the cross.
He did. Yeah, that's really powerful. And so, I mean, there's no better example. There's no harder example, but there's no better. So why does it matter? What happens when spouses are servant-hearted in marriage?
I really think that's God's design for marriage. It's supposed to be a picture of Christ in the church. We've just talked about what Christ is. And the church is just the body of believers worldwide. And so when we serve each other sacrificially, there's this environment of mutual love and respect that is in your home. And that really glorifies God. And Ephesians 5:21 says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Okay, so that's what God wants us to do. And it matters, I think, because God created marriage, and who would know better how to have a successful marriage than him? I mean, he knows us. He knows what marriage is supposed to be. And so if we're servant-hearted like God wants us to be, it's going to make a difference in your marriage. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's why it matters, is because it makes a difference, and it's God's plan.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. And it's, you already said when you're doing it, it makes your marriage really fun. It's a great place to be.
It is. And when you're both doing it, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, Nancy's better about being consistent than I am, probably.
Mm-hmm.
She is. But when she does, it makes me want to more.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not like I say, stop that. I don't want to be nice to you. Quit being nice to me.
Right. Right. Right.
No, it's not that. It's like, yeah, I'm missing the boat right now, and I
Mm-hmm.
need to get back on track.
Yeah, that's good. And there's something else to this too, is that, if you have, whether or not you have kids or a family in the home, whether or not you have neighbors that you spend time with, or wherever your community is, the people around you are going to want to be around you more when your
Oh,
marriage
yeah.
is in that good place. And it's really when the marriage is able to reflect God's love the way he wants it to.
That's such a good point, because we really do represent God's plan for marriage when we're out
Hmm.
in the world.
Hmm.
And I think for Nancy and I, as we become more visible, we are very conscious of how we act out in public.
Hmm.
Not that we're faking it, but
Hmm.
like, we want people to see what we really have,
Yeah.
and to see that it's not just what they see in a video or a podcast or something,
Right.
that it's something that we try to live out. We're not
Yeah.
perfect, but we want to live that out. And so I think for all couples,
Hmm.
because I've had so many couples that have gone through counseling and really got their marriage on track, really putting God first, each other second. They've told me later, people look at us and they say, "What happened to you?
Mm.
Why are you're different? What
Hmm.
happened?" And so you do get to be that light, and you do give you an opportunity to say, we figured out that God's plan for marriage was better than ours, and we're trying to live that out. And so you can be this witness and
Hmm.
encourage other people. So I think there's so many good things that come out of that,
Yeah, that's
of
so
doing
good.
that, not just for you and your marriage,
Yeah.
but how that can, and your kids. Oh my
Yep.
gosh. If your kids see you doing that, especially if you've been a couple that didn't do that real well,
Mhm.
the kids are they want that. And so they're
Mhm.
so resilient. They'll just jump all over that. And it gives them security. And because most kids have a lot of kids around them that parents are
Mm.
divorced. I had,
Yes.
from the time I went all the way through high school, I had one kid in my
Mm.
class that had a divorce.
Wow.
One out of all
Wow.
those years. So, and now it's not like that. And
Not like
so
that.
our kids, I think so many kids are fearful their parents will get a divorce.
Mhm.
And so when they see these things and they see that, it gives them a security, and
Mhm.
they believe you when you say mom and dad are never going to separate or divorce,
Mhm.
because they're seeing it lived out. You can't tell a kid that, and then the next minute you're throwing things at each other in the
Yeah.
kitchen.
No,
That, that doesn't work.
they
But
don't
if it
believe that.
plays out, it gives them security. So, whatever the constraint is, get you there. If this motivates you just because you want it for your kid, great.
Yeah.
Let God build it from that standpoint.
Mhm.
Whatever it is, it's going to make such a difference
No, that's
in
so
marriage.
good. That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one more thing that we encounter a lot at Awesome Marriage is couples who are in a tough place, because people are going to reach out because they are hurting, not
Yeah.
because they're having an amazing time. And so people reach
Right.
out when they're having a tough time, and they are just drained. Having a struggling marriage, having a marriage that's not life-giving can drain you so quick. Your energy
Absolutely.
is just so zapped. It's weighs you down. And then when your marriage is in a good place, you are actually able to live out of this energy and joy. And it's like what Jesus says in John 10:10. He says, come to bring life to the full. The enemies come to steal, kill, and destroy, but I came to bring life to the full.
Yeah.
And that's really, I feel like the shift you're talking about is when a couple is able to get past the things that are keeping them kind of at odds and create a marriage where they're actually life-giving to one another, and then it goes beyond the marriage too. And I think that's such an amazing part of God's design.
Absolutely. And and I think to that point, when you feel like we're living God's design,
Mhm.
then that's pretty special too.
Yeah.
And it kind of begins to all make sense. Maybe some of the things you're thinking, how could I ever serve him or her?
Yeah.
Don't you know what they did?
Yeah.
But holding on to that is not going to give you the kind of marriage that you want or that God has for you. And so when you begin to do that and experience it, it does make such a difference.
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So let's make this a little more practical. What does serving one another look like for you and Nancy?
I think one of the things that she did better than I early on, but once I empathy has been a really big deal
Mm,
for her and something we've talked about a lot, putting ourselves in each other's shoes, because you're so different when you come get married. And a lot of those differences continue, but trying to look at something from their point of view and not
hmm
expecting them to have your point of view, that's been huge for us.
hmm
Of just, okay, I want to see this through her point of view. And even though I wouldn't do it that way, even though that doesn't make sense to me, that's where she is. And it makes it a
hmm
lot easier for me to come alongside her then and not be critical or say, that's stupid. I mean, I've had people, guys in counseling, wives talking emotions. She said, goes, no, this isn't about emotions. Here's the facts.
Yeah.
No, you got to go to the emotions and understand those. And
hmm
so I think that has helped us to anticipate more what each other needs
hmm
at that particular time. I think respect is something that we've always had, but I
mm
think it's probably grown
hmm
over the years as we've just done life together and we've seen things in our life, in our marriage that we really respect about each other. Nancy's really good about speaking words of encouragement to me,
mm
and I do the same for her. But I think for me in my love languages, that means so much when she
hmm
does that, and she has a way. I think that God prompts her to say it in times when I really need it, and so I think that makes a difference, and it makes me want to again do some serve her in some way. One thing that we probably worked on a lot was patience. We both were kind of impatient people,
hmm
and so we've learned to be much more patient with each other. And I think that's helped a lot to be more kind with each other. And then just, what we've talked about before, just asking your spouse every day, how can I help you? And,
mm
and most days Nancy says nothing. But some days maybe she says, I need you to do this or that, and sometimes for me it's real practical. It's, hey,
hmm
can you take this deposit to the bank today? Can you pick up this prescription for me? Can you do this? And she doesn't go, I guess. No, it's
mm
like, okay, I'll do it.
hmm
Put it in my purse so I won't forget it,
hmm
something like that. And so I think that means a lot because I've seen people tell me, well, anytime I don't ask them to do anything anymore because every time I did, I heard a sigh or they
Yeah.
rolled their eyes at me or stuff like that. And so
hmm
that's not serving each other when you do it that way. Serving is saying, sure, I can do that. And knowing that if she needs me to do something, I'm going to do it too. So
Yeah.
I think for us, it's evolved over time. But I think the big thing for us, we're really putting ourselves in each other's shoes and trying to see what we can do as a
mm
spouse to meet the other's needs. And to also what we've learned is to point them each other to God too. And
hmm
because I can't meet all her needs, but
hmm
God can. And she can't meet all mine, but God can. And so maybe it's like, well, let's pray about this
hmm
together. Let's bring God into this and see what he would do in this situation. And that makes a difference for sure.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's really good too, because I like how you make, it's important to know what are the things you can't do for your spouse. There's some things that only God can do, but I
Right.
like how you're making that still something that you're supporting each other in. You're not just saying, no, go to God. You're saying, yeah, let's go
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. It's like you go in your prayer room for about
Right.
an hour and maybe God will straighten you out because I'm not doing good. Right.
Right.
No.
No,
Yeah.
that's good. Yeah, because I feel like that's a real thing, in marriage. Is sometimes I think the hardest part is where maybe we'll get more into this, but where you feel like I'm serving a lot, I don't feel very served. But
Yeah.
that's where you do have to go to God, you know.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Because God will meet our needs, and hit
Yeah.
their needs that definitely He's designed for a husband and wife to meet for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things in marriage, but there's some things He wants us to make sure that He's meeting because we
Yeah,
can't. I'm
we
gonna,
can't.
no matter how much I try, I'm still gonna let her down sometime. I'm never gonna be the perfect husband.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna, you know, those kind of things. And so if she was totally dependent on me, then she would be disappointed a lot. But when
Yes.
she can depend on God and sees me as this extra blessing God's put in her life, hopefully, then it allows me to do the things God equips me to do and for her to trust God to do the things that only He can do.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
was probably a huge thing for us,
Mm-hmm.
for sure, getting to
Yeah.
that point.
That's a game changer. Truly,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is. Yeah, because I feel like that's a recipe for a really disappointing marriage. Is if you want your spouse to be the perfect spouse,
I
It's just
know.
not possible.
It's not. And I think that's where we see so many divorces in the first year of marriage now is
Mm,
because of unrealistic expectations like that. You watch, you binge watch Hallmark movies and you think everything is supposed to be like this and end up
mhm.
perfect. And then you get married and you have your first fight and the person does things different than you did. And where'd
Yeah.
this person come from? And instead of working through those things
Yeah.
and learning to value those differences, you say, married the wrong person. And then you
Yeah.
go out and then get divorced and marry the wrong person again.
Mm.
If you're doing that, if you're looking at it that way.
Yeah. 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 Putting those expectations on God does change things for sure. That's
Abs
huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and serving, I feel like serving can be so many different things in marriage. It can be tangible things. It could be,
Mhm.
for us, sometimes it's the things like the way that we've divided up the chores, in the house. And
Sure.
it's like, okay, well, I'm doing this for the family and I'm doing it intentionally for you, and it's like just
Yeah.
little things. And they're small, but they matter. It's like Brian does the dishes at night. I make the coffee in the morning. Just the little things that like we just both
You do for
really
each other.
appreciate. Yes. And it's like, yeah, it's just a mundane thing, but it still matters to each of us. We both
Absolutely.
appreciate it. And sometimes it can be things that are more difficult, It can be helping by listening instead of trying to solve the problem. It could be a lot of
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah.
I feel like overarching is just that attitude, the heart
Exactly.
change of looking to serve each other
That's a
is the
good
biggest
point.
piece here.
It can't be a checklist. It's gotta be from your heart. This is
Mhm.
what I know God wants me to do, and I'm doing it through Him for my
Mhm.
spouse, and it's done out of love.
Yeah.
Because I think if you do it out of a checklist, it's not gonna be the same. Your
Mhm.
spouse isn't gonna see it the same and gonna result the same. I mean, you have those things in your mind, but you like, let them come through your relationship with God, that love that He helps you convey.
Yeah, I think that that's such an important point because if you're looking at a checklist, then you're going to think, "Well, I did my things. Now
Mhm.
I'm done. I'm done."
You don't have anything checked over here, honey. What's wrong?
Right, right.
I'll be waiting over here.
And then you get into
No,
scorekeeping, which is definitely not part of an awesome marriage.
does not work at all.
No, not at all. So let's talk about some of the areas where it's hardest for your couples you work with, and then for you personally. Either way, what are the areas where it's difficult and why?
Well, I think pride, selfishness gets in the way for all of us at one time or the other. I think that's something we have to consistently be aware of. That I have to think, why okay, I did that. Why did I do that? Well, most of the time it's going to be pride or selfishness for me.
Mm.
It's just like I'm tired of being a good husband, you know? and so God's gracious through those times, but sometimes, you can feel different ways. I mean, you don't want to get stuck there, but that's reality sometimes. Those are the times that I might let her down. And if she totally
Mm.
depended on me, instead of her being able to just give me some space and pray for me until I come out of it.
Mm.
I think what I see a lot with work demands, exhaustions, I think a lot of times that I'm just too tired
Mm.
to do that. Or,
Mhm.
we got, why do we have 5 kids? It's like, and so I think sometimes those are some seasons that I think couples get out of it. They're so focused on other things,
Mm.
work or life things like that. And so I think it's easy to put serving your spouse on the back burner because you don't think you have enough energy. And what
Mhm.
I see, if you continue to serve your spouse, you're going to have more energy.
Mm.
That
Mhm.
energizes you. Your home, your marriage should be a refuge for you.
Mhm.
It should recharge you when you get together in the evening and you see each other and you hug each other.
Mhm.
That, because you can't control what happens during the day, but you can control what happens in your home.
Mm.
I think it's when we have expectations that aren't met and they may not even be realistic to start with,
Mhm.
but over time they can lead to resentment. And once you
Mhm.
get into resentment, it's really hard to serve. I mean, because then you
Mhm.
got to go through the process first of forgiving and letting go and then being able to serve, even though your spouse may not change in that.
Mhm.
You've got to free yourself. As long as you're holding resentment or grudges or anger against someone, they still have a lot of power in your life. And that power in marriage, a lot of times, is keeping you from doing the things God wants you to do in marriage
Mm.
because of the resentment. So that has to be taken care of. And that can be a process. I mean, certainly
Mhm.
that's a big process thing we see in counseling a lot. I think probably our culture,
Mm.
it's such a me culture right now. And
Mhm.
it's more like take care of yourself and don't worry about anybody else.
Yeah.
Well, that's never going to work in marriage,
Yeah.
ever. And so I think I see that as an issue that you get caught up in, just our culture that is so self-centered, it seems like, in so many ways right now. And then not resolving things from the past that keep you from embracing a great marriage now, or serving each other, or being vulnerable with each other because you're afraid to do that. So some of those things I mentioned, probably counseling is going to be really important. Anytime you get some resentment you can't get rid of, these barriers from past hurts, things like that, those kind of things, most likely a counselor can really help you guys work through that. And that may be something one of you needs to work through, and then you come together with the counselor to kind of set a new path going forward. Hey, I've worked on this. Counselor says he or she's worked hard. I think they're ready for you to be able to take a risk of vulnerability again, or serving them again. And you kind of chart a new path with some accountability in place. So those are the kind of things that I come to my mind, that as I was thinking about those questions, that I see that where it really does make it hard for us to continue to do that season after season.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good list of really tough and real things that could be a barrier to this. And I know you mentioned counseling is one of the steps, but if somebody is listening and they find, like, they hear one of those things and they think, okay, I think that's something for me, but they don't have a counselor yet, maybe they're not sure, what would be a first step to just kind of figuring out where to start with that right now?
Well, I think self-examination is always good. Prayer is always good. God, what is keeping me? I don't feel like serving my spouse right now. I feel some anger towards myself. Also, I feel some resentment. God, help reveal those things. And one, I think you go first to God and let Him. Journaling, I think, is a really good thing to do, to kind of bring up some things. And then once you've got them, you can say, okay, what do I need to do with these things? Do I need counseling? Maybe it's communication with each other. But a lot of it, I think, for me, always starts with, I learned a long time ago to look at myself first and not point at Nancy. And so I think when you begin to look at yourself first and be honest with yourself and start letting God work on you, because like selfishness, that's something you and God can work on together.
Yeah.
And, God, help me realize it's such a pattern in my life, Lord. I don't even know that I'm always aware of when I do it. So
Yeah.
help me be aware of when I do that, and you think about, oh my gosh, since I got this job promotion and I'm working 3 nights a week, I don't have the energy to do that. And then you decide, is it worth it? Or maybe this is only for 6 months, but we need to talk about it so we understand each other, that we're not putting things on the back burner, but it might, instead of being a 10 as far as me serving you right now, maybe it is going to be a 5 for a while. But my goal is to get back to a 10. I'm just tired when I get home right now. So those kind of things, I would say. When there's past hurts, certainly you can work on those with God. I do think that counseling is a great way to move quicker through those, to surface them, and at least get things out in the open that you need to work on. And so, because sometimes I don't know, I think with past hurts, we think, okay, I need to forgive, I need to do this. And then maybe something happens and it triggers you, and all of a sudden you're back at square one. So if you're in that cycle, how do we get out of that cycle so that we can move forward? So those are the kind of things that I would say when you find yourself in that situation. There's some good books, and there's certainly good podcasts and stuff. But again, be careful of what you read. Who's the author? What are their beliefs? What are their values? What's behind the podcast you're listening to? Because there's some really good stuff out there.
Yeah.
And then there's some really bad stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
That will not help at all. In fact, it'll probably make things worse.
Yes. That's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I like that you mentioned if you've gotten into a pattern. I mean, I think counseling is really helpful when you realize you've gotten stuck in a pattern that you
Right.
just you're circling and circling and you can't figure out how to get out of it.
Right. And it's the old insanity thing. If you do the same thing over and over, expecting different results. I mean, it's kind of like that when you get in that cycle. And sometimes you just don't know. I remember that early in marriage when we didn't know how to really resolve conflict. We'd get mad. We'd not speak to each other a couple of days. We'd miss each other. We'd get back together. Couple weeks later, same cycle.
Yep.
over and over. And I can
Yeah.
remember thinking about that. We are on, and that's when I didn't even know what a cycle was.
Yeah.
That, we're doing this and we got to figure out something. That was probably at the point when we went to counseling at that.
Mm.
We just could not break that on our own.
Mm.
We're young and
Mm-hmm.
selfish and, still trying to change each other. And so all those things were going on. And so it did take a counselor that really helped us get back on track and recenter and see what we
Mm.
were doing. And that's where it can be valuable. A mentor couple can be valuable too.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
that help you through those things. But what I would say with all of that, don't stay stuck there.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something, do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just don't keep, because then it just gets worse. I think it gets worse and worse. Maybe gradual, maybe
Mm-hmm.
big, but it's not gonna get better
Right. Yeah. It's
by
not going to
not
go
doing
away.
anything. It's not
It's
gonna
not
go
going to go
away.
away if you don't change something.
And sometimes I think I used to think, oh, it'll just go away,
Yeah.
but it didn't. It always comes back because we hadn't resolved it.
Yeah. I thought that too. We definitely thought the same thing. It was like, we'll, I don't know, grow out of it or something,
Yeah.
but you really don't. You don't.
No, it's not like jeans when you're growing
You're
up
right.
that you grow out of,
Yeah.
No, it's not the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's one disadvantage of getting married young is you don't realize yet that you don't just
No,
grow better.
it's just like this is the way life is going to be forever.
Yeah.
It's what we
Yeah.
think,
Right.
or we want our marriage to look like that. My parents
Yes.
were a good model, but we thought, hey, we're never going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not realizing that where they were then was not where they were when they were first married, young, like
Right.
we were. They had to work
Right.
through a lot of things too.
Yeah, no, that is helpful. That's really
Yeah,
helpful.
for
That's
sure.
good. So, yeah, there's a lot of good action steps there. So that's a great place to get started if you are not sure, what to do, and if it's really hard to even think about serving. Those are great
Yeah.
places to start. So let's make this a little more practical and tangible. So, what are some ways you would advise a spouse to help cultivate a more servant-hearted marriage?
I think the old deal that we talked about earlier, how can I serve you?
Mm-hmm.
Asking yourself, how can I serve you today?
Good.
The first time I asked Nancy that, and we had good marriage at that time, but it kind of like it stopped her in her tracks, I guess, because I never had asked her before.
Right.
And so you may have to, pick your spouse off the floor because they fainted or something with that. But I think that's a good thing to get in the habit of. And I think what it does for me, even most of the time Nancy says I'm good, that it makes me conscious of that I do need to serve her each day. And
Mm.
is there a specific way that she needs me to that day that I need to add to the other things that I'm trying to do to serve her?
Mm.
So
Mhm.
that helps way. I think looking for, I've had so many couples with kids that when the husband just decides to do one of the chores for the
Mhm.
spouse, it's like, oh my gosh, it lightened her load a little
Mhm.
bit, and it showed that he cared and he was observant and he watched. So whatever it is of looking at a way that you can lighten your spouse's load, maybe your spouse, like Brian, maybe he always does the dishes and maybe one night you come in and say, hey, go sit down and watch the game or whatever.
Mhm.
I'm going to do this tonight.
Mhm.
Not that you have to do that, but Brian paid me for that. And so,
Well, surprise, I did that Sunday, so
oh, see, there you go. I think watching active listening, not being defensive, I think those are really helpful too. Because sometimes
Mhm.
you get in that pattern of not listening well.
Mhm.
And so you come up with the same response because you hadn't taken time to really hear what they're saying. So that's a definitely practical way. Make sure you're
Mhm.
listening to what you're saying about saying. And
Mhm.
that's where I think the whole idea of looping, listen to it, say back to them what you think you heard, or in a way
Mhm.
that shows that you heard, so they can see that you were listening and that you got it right. And if it
Yeah.
didn't, they can clarify it with you. Prayer together and individually for God to build servant hearts within you
Mhm.
is a great prayer, because I
Mhm.
think when you involve God in those things, you'll just receive some prompts you weren't getting otherwise, or
Mm.
you were missing. Maybe they
Yeah.
were there, but you were missing. But when you think, okay, God, I'm asking you to build a servant heart in me, bring things to mind that I can do, and then when they do come, it's like, okay, that's from God.
Yeah.
That just didn't happen. Express gratitude. I think that's so important when you see your
Mhm.
spouse, even if it's a little thing. Maybe if your towel drops on the floor and your wife picks it up and puts it on the towel rack, just thank you.
Mhm.
It just means a lot,
Mhm.
even in the little things. And it gets us in the habit of just being grateful for each other with all the kind of things do. And then I think probably the verse that has helped me a lot with that, John 13:34, love one another as I've loved you. Okay, the person he put in my life to love more than anyone on this earth is Nancy. And so the more I can try to love her the way I know that Christ loves me, those are home run days.
Yeah.
I wish there were
Yeah.
more of them, but when they are, you realize, of course it works. Of course that makes a difference like that. We just most of what gets in the way I see in marriages is ourselves. I
Yeah.
get in the way of myself in my marriage, instead of dying to self, what I need to serve her, how do I love her well? Because there's fulfillment that comes into that. It's not like you're, as a guy, just being a wimp or something. It's like, no,
Right.
there is joy in that, of knowing that this is
Yes.
God's plan, and with his help, I'm doing the best I can in it.
Yeah.
That's a big step.
That's a big step. Yes. And the way God designed us, if we're trying to follow him and we're doing the things he tells us to do, you're right. There is joy in that. There's a fulfillment
Absolutely.
in God. I'm not doing it perfect, but I'm trying my
Yeah.
best to follow what you said. And there's something really freeing and enjoyable about knowing that you're taking steps. Like you said, if you start praying for those promptings and you start understanding them or getting them, picking them up that when you didn't before, it's an opportunity to follow through on what he's calling you to. And so that's a
Yeah.
fun feeling.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's kind of look at the other side of this then. So what if you're working on this and you really want to cultivate that servant heart, but do you feel like your spouse is not part of it? You feel like that you're the only spouse doing the serving. What do you do then?
That's hard.
Mhm.
But I think as we get into that, I think we had to know that there are exceptions. People,
Mhm.
I've worked with people that try and have for a long time, but they come into counseling, they realize they're in an abusive situation, or
Mm.
maybe there's some selfishness in the spouse. We hear the word narcissism thrown around a lot
Mhm.
today. It's kind of a buzzword. It's
Mhm.
interesting how different buzzwords are in our culture. Everybody's not a narcissist.
Mhm.
I mean, I think we all are narcissistic in some way, because selfishness is the bottom end of that scale,
Yeah.
but the scale goes all the way up to narcissistic personality disorder,
Mhm.
and so most of us fall somewhere on that scale at some
Mhm.
time or the other. The more we could stay toward the low end of it. I don't know that any of us will ever get where we're never completely unselfish. I mean, I
Right.
haven't got there yet,
Mhm.
but that doesn't, most of the time, if that affects my marriage, it's easy to reconcile that or be aware of that.
Mhm.
So that would be kind of a disclaimer on it. But if you're the only one, just remember God sees you.
Mm.
And the more that if you're asking God, help me be the husband, the wife you want me to be today,
Mhm.
then when you go to bed at night and with God's help, you've done your best, there is like we said, there's a peace, there's a joy that comes with that. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, it's between me and God. Then it becomes not me and, okay, what is Nancy going to do? Because
Mhm.
I'm doing all these great things. It becomes, God, I served her the way I thought you wanted me to today.
Mhm.
And there's a peace that comes with that. There's an obedience to God that I did that, even though whether Nancy responded in the right way or not.
Mm. Mhm.
And I think that's where we get off a lot is thinking, oh, I did this, you better do this.
Mhm.
And that's not the way to go into it. It's like,
Right.
I'm going to do what God wants me to do as long as God wants me to do it.
Mm.
And if God ever tells me quit doing it, which I don't think he will, but he might somewhere
Mhm.
down the line, that's what you have to do. And so you just serving, as you're serving, look at it as that you are serving him,
Mhm.
because you're doing what he wants you to do in your marriage. And it's not dependent on how your spouse reciprocates, or
Yeah.
what they do or what they don't.
Yeah.
I think a good prayer is to pray for your spouse's heart to be softened. I mean, to put
Mm.
that in God's hands, because
Mhm.
sometimes our hearts can get really hardened.
Mhm.
And so maybe I see that, and I see some things I know I need to change, and I begin changing. It's okay to ask God to soften Nancy's heart. I know
Mhm.
I've hurt her. Can you help her see that these efforts are really real, and that
Mm.
this is coming? I tell people all the time, if you see behavior in your spouse, look to see if you see Christ in them. If you see Christ in them, you can
Mhm.
trust that.
Yeah.
If you don't, it's probably going to be a checklist. It's kind of,
Yeah.
okay, I can do this checklist for a while till she, get her back in line or whatever. Some people think there are all kinds of interesting things. Counseling can help you do it. I've had couples where one is doing all the work.
Mm.
And I think counseling really helps that person stay grounded, stay focused, and give their spouse some time to recover from that. And it depends.
Mhm.
Some people just are not responding because they're just selfish.
Mm-hmm.
Some people don't respond because they've been hurt really bad in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to get that point of where they're willing to be vulnerable again, and your
Yeah.
consistency is going to help them get there.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully in situations like in counseling, if I meet with them separately, then I'm able to help the spouse. Okay, here's some things I want you to look for in your husband.
Mm-hmm.
See if you begin to see them. And so because sometimes a spouse just has walled off so much, they don't even
Mm-hmm.
want to see that because they don't want to risk getting hurt again.
Yeah.
So that kind of helps. Being okay with God's timing, I think, is really
Mm-hmm.
important in
Mm-hmm.
change. If you're praying for God to work on your spouse, God's going to do his part. Now, your spouse has got to respond in some way, but, be patient.
Mm-hmm.
Let God lead you in that. And then the scorekeeping, we mentioned that,
Mm-hmm.
keep no record of wrongs, 1 Corinthians 13:5. When you're loving someone, that's something you've got to give to the Lord,
Mm-hmm.
because does it really do any good to hang on to that? I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we hang on to it because, well, it keeps me safe and keeps me from not letting them do that to me again.
Yeah.
Or that, well, you don't know what they did. I got to punish them. They got to feel the pain that I felt in this. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's really God's job. And certainly you can set a boundary to protect yourself, so
Mm-hmm.
certain things don't happen anymore. But if you're using that as a scorecard, then there's going to keep resentments there that keep you from ever getting to an awesome marriage. You're
Yeah.
just putting you're putting another wall up when you do that. So I think those are some of the things that you can do. I think it's hard when
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you're really doing what God wants you to do. But I think if you know that God sees you, if you do continue to do what God wants you to do, you're praying, trusting God's timing, all those things, I think, help you go through that process.
Mm-hmm.
I've had situations where the other spouse, as far as I know, never really changed,
Wow.
but most of the time they do. Most of the
Mm-hmm.
time we can work through. I think that's where counseling is important, because if you're doing
Mm-hmm.
these things and there's some reason your spouse is not able to respond,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's helpful for your spouse to understand then why they can't respond, and help them understand that, and then help them take that risk to be vulnerable again.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah, that's good. Because I feel like as you're explaining those situations, I've seen two where one spouse is just really dealing with something of their own, and they maybe aren't even able to
right?
verbalize that. They're not really sure how to handle it. They're just kind of going through it, and maybe they're not even aware because they're just kind of surviving a lot really stressful time at work or stressful transition in life, something like that. It could be something like postpartum depression, just all these different
Yeah,
things that you might, or depression in general, work extreme stresses. I've seen this happen a few times where the spouse is not responsive, but they are just kind of stuck in something of their own.
yes.
And counseling would help that too, either spouse or both together.
Yeah, and I think too, don't make assumptions about your spouse. I think we
Mhm.
do that and we get
Mhm.
stuck in our assumption. Our assumption in our mind becomes this absolute truth,
Mm.
which you've never really. So I think having some really honest, gentle conversations
Mm.
about what you're feeling and that with each other is,
Mhm.
I know it's easier for some people than others, but that's a really good place to begin
Mhm.
to flesh some things out. If
That's a great point, because I was wondering, is there a place for a conversation? How would you go about that? Because it's kind of a tricky subject if you're like, "Hey, I feel like I'm serving you a lot and you're not serving me." Like,
yeah,
obviously you wouldn't start it like that. But when would it be appropriate?
Yeah, I think if you're doing that and you think, I really want our marriage to be what we thought it was the day we got married. Remember the hopes and dreams we talked about?
Mm.
And I feel like we're off of that, and I'm really working hard to do that. Can we talk about that? Because I want you to join me in this.
Mm.
I want you to at least open up to God and see what He has to say for you. I'm going to keep serving you,
Yeah.
but I want it where you can receive that. And
Mhm.
I think you've got a wall up right now
Mhm.
because of the past, because I'm very sorry for it, but I'm repentant. I'm
Mhm.
changing. I'm letting God change me. Um, so having that kind of a conversation
Mhm.
can be really helpful.
Mhm.
Sometimes you need maybe a counselor or someone else there with you in those conversations.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's just kind of figuring out how do we get rid of whatever's keeping us from doing this,
Yeah.
from both doing this,
Yeah.
and get to both on the same page of, okay, whatever it takes, we're going to figure this out,
Yeah.
and be patient with it. Like I said, a lot of these aren't just because I start doing something different doesn't mean in 30 days our marriage is going to be,
Right.
wow, going to
Right.
put us on the cover of Awesome Marriage Magazine or
Yeah.
something.
Do we have that?
No, we
I
might.
think we should have that.
Couple of the month, right?
Yeah, that's good. And I like how you modeled that conversation. There's a very gentle and gracious way
Yeah,
to bring up the subject without blaming, without
right.
coming on so strong. I think that could be a really productive
It,
conversation.
yeah, and talk from your heart. And sometimes it's okay if you think you might get flustered in it, write it down and just say,
Mm-hmm.
"These are my thoughts. I want to read these to you."
Mm-hmm.
Do it that way. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that's easier because you feel like you get in the situation, you might get flustered, or maybe your spouse makes a facial expression or something that throws you off. So
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to write those things down.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good. And somewhere in that, it brought to mind something we haven't really touched on yet, which is the possibility that two spouses are sort of serving out of their own love language, not the
Hmm.
spouses. And so both spouses might feel like they are making a lot of effort to show this love and care and servant heartedness, and it's just not communicating what they want it to.
Exactly. That's such a good point because I think every couple we talk about what their love language is and how to meet that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think ever since Gary Chapman came out with that book, I probably had 3 couples that had the same love language. It just
Wow.
doesn't usually happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're right. It's like most of us act out of what our love language is.
Mm-hmm.
So with mine being probably words of encouragement, I could do that well. Nancy's
Mm-hmm.
is quality time. So I can tell her how wonderful she is and how great and how proud I am of her. And I see this in her heart all day long. And she loves that.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm not spending quality time with her, with just the 2 of us,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like that's nice, but you kind of missed it.
Yeah.
You didn't do everything.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that up because when you meet it probably is. I was listening to somebody this morning that was talking about that probably thought that was the best marriage book
Hmm.
that's come out because
Mm-hmm.
it helps us understand that there are differences
Mm-hmm.
and to understand what our spouse's difference is
Mm-hmm.
and how we can help meet that difference, even though that difference is not one that is ours. I mean, I think
Yes.
we all have all of them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's usually 1 or 2 that each person, and when you hit those, you kind of hit home runs
Yes.
with that spouse.
Yeah, that's huge. And we have an awesome resource for helping you discover what speaks to your spouse. It's called the Love Cans. It's a resource we'll link in the show notes, but it's more even going a step farther than just knowing the love language. It's asking your spouse, what is it that I can do that makes you feel really loved? Because we
Yeah.
might even think, Nancy might think, okay, words of affirmation. I'll just say some good things, but there could be specific ways that really impacts you more. We had a hard time with this because Brian's word of affirmation too. And I would say things, but I would say them like maybe kind of offhand or casual. And so I
Mm,
felt like I was really making an effort. It's not my love language. And I was really trying to speak his language. And he didn't even hear it because the way I was saying it was just not like very clear or not in a timing where he could receive it. So I think the more you can know about what really does speak to your spouse, then you can eliminate all that confusion of you're both trying so hard
yeah.
and it's not working.
Yeah, and it allows you. I mean, I want to love Nancy the way she receives love the most, and I'm not going to change her. I can't say, okay, listen, that's not my love language. Mine's just
Yeah.
words of affirmation.
Yeah.
So that's got to work for you.
Yeah.
That just doesn't work. I think sometimes we try that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So taking time to really invest in that, and certainly ask them, so the efforts you put in are hitting the mark.
Yes.
Because that's what you want to happen.
Yes. And I think that can be just a really common area of frustration where
Yeah.
both spouses are like, what's going on here? I'm trying.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that is frustrating when you feel like you're trying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think it's just missing, just what I need to hit the mark. I was just thinking of an example, what came to my mind that, and this guy, basically he was saying that if you take 2 lines and say they're the couple and say one has one love language and the other. So at the bottom, they're both right together.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like 2 degrees difference as time goes on,
Oh, yeah.
that goes farther apart.
Yeah.
And so it's figuring what that is and catching it as quick as you can. Because
Mm-hmm.
even though you may feel like you're right here,
Mm-hmm.
that 2 degrees over time
Yeah.
expands and puts a gap there.
Yes. And that's really frustrating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Really painful.
Yeah.
So that's an important point. We'll put that Love Cans resource in the show notes so you can grab that real easily, just because that's such a helpful place to start. Well, this has been a really helpful conversation about cultivating a servant-hearted marriage. What is your final piece of advice for our listeners today?
But I think what I would hope people do is focus on your heart, your actions.
Mm-hmm.
Trust God to work in you to serve your spouse better, to serve your spouse in the way God would want you to. And then Galatians 6:9 says, let us not become weary in doing good.
Mm-hmm.
So God knows we're going to get weary.
Mm-hmm.
For at proper time, we'll reap a harvest if we do not give up. Again, I think that may not be completely a promise, but it's certainly a principle that I see work.
Mm-hmm.
That I see work. If you continue to do it, if you're both reasonably healthy people,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to eventually it's going to work. It's going to make a difference.
That's good. That's really good. So if you're listening today and you heard anything that you want to follow up on, check the show notes for those details. Make sure that if there's anything you want to reach out to us about, you can always reach us at info@awesomemarriage.com. We are here. Check our website for resources. We've got tons of stuff for you to help this content be more applicable and practical. So check awesomemarriage.com and email us at info@awesomemarriage.com. Thanks so much for joining us today and spending time with us on the podcast. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.